I'm waiting.
Yours is not right. That's not right.
I'm, in all honesty, just waiting for Jackie to give me a nod. Okay. All right, I'd like to welcome everybody out to our city council meeting for Wednesday, August 8th. This is our work meeting. In an effort to get staff out of here in a reasonable time tonight, we're going to go ahead and get started. First item on the agenda, item 2.1, review of this evening's agenda. Are there any items that we need to review or make changes to for the agenda for tonight? Okay. Item 2.2, future agenda items. Any items that the council would like to address in future meeting?
I do have an issue that a resident raised regarding being charged for secondary water when in fact they'll never have access to it. So do we charge any kind of connection or any sort of fee on a regular basis, regardless of whether they get secondary water?
So the areas that have access to secondary water are the only areas that are charged that fee. So they have the choice whether they want to connect or not.
They opt in or not.
Yes.
If it's there.
So if you have an address or something, I think.
Yeah.
Is this a resident or a council member that has to?
No, well, this council member would also have a similar concern, but since it's right in my backyard, but I don't get it. But no, it is not. It is not a friend. It's an actual resident. All right, I have his address, so I'll give it to you, Justin, and then you can, if you could call him. What's that?
Okay.
Okay, just.
You good? Okay. Any other items, Sherry?
The two that were emailed, the one that did ask about.
Yeah, the
Is
first
that, that's already put on.
for next
And then,
week's agenda.
It's on my
and the,
discuss.
on the other patriotic one.
Yep.
Okay, and then I do have an issue with the fencing ordinance. That I would hope that we could discuss again. It's the ban on wood materials for fence. I just think it's really inappropriate. Like in an agricultural zone, if I wanted to do a fence, like I wanted to put cable, like railroad ties and cables through it, I couldn't even do that kind of fence to keep my horses in because it's wood.
So I would be happy to have that discussion in the future, so I'm sure we can have staff put it on future.
We have a joint meeting at the end of this month.
Right.
So we can, maybe with the planning commission, have a joint meeting.
So I could at least understand why it's there, and maybe if we can make some sort of agricultural adjustments or something like that to it.
Okay. Any other items? Okay. Moving on, item 3.1, discussion and nomination of a council member to the Utah League of Cities and Towns Board of Directors. Brett.
So Utah League of Cities and Towns reached out to all cities that belong to the organization and asking if you want to nominate any of you to serve on that board.
I'm already on that board.
Is it Nicole?
I renominate Nicole.
Yeah, I was
Still
saying.
looking for more. Apparently, so
Apparently, I'm not doing a good enough job.
I would have.
Somebody else is.
I would be happy to have Nicole continue in that capacity.
So no more at.
It just feels like.
We're looking for volunteers. I'm not raising
Like
my hand.
Sherry, do you want to?
But it feels like, I feel it's good that we have a representative from our city, but you already are, so I think that we're adequately, more than adequately represented.
Yeah, they keep sending out the email, and you might be getting a copy on it or sent out to you. They apparently not getting what they want, asking for more.
Okay then. That was a hearty discussion.
The latest one they sent out, they specified that.
Yeah.
So we're in compliance with that.
Okay, then we will move on to item 3.2, review of the proposed budget amendment. Director Ray.
Just give you a review of it. We talked about it last meeting some. We have a number of developers that we give impact fee reimbursements to. These are based on us collecting impact fees in their respective areas. So all of these impact fee reimbursements would be dependent on collecting the impact fees before they're spent. So we've got some of them that are coming up, so we're rolling those out now so that they're available to the contractor when they complete and when we've collected the impact fees. So these are all revenue neutral. We have to collect the impact fees before we spend them. But, so these are not increases or decreases to our budget. The next page, these are all items. These were projects that were budgeted for in 2018, and we didn't get them built. In fact, most of them didn't get started. So we're wanting to roll them into the 2019 year. There are a couple of things here that I just want to point out. Arches Park, because of changes in design, went from what was in the budget last year at $500,000 now to $1,250,000. It will include a playground similar to what's out here.
Is that the difference in cost?
That's a big share of it. We also, the Shoshone Pond, we budgeted $45,000. The developer has already paid $40,000 towards this, which went into our general fund. So I'm making an adjustment to that one based on what he's already paid. The only other difference from what you've seen is we also did budget last year for the park impact fee to be renewed based on the Dancy's property. That needs to be brought into it hasn't even started yet, so we need that in the 2019 year. Everything else is just carrying over from what we approved in last year, and we can get to it. This is all impact fee money, or the capital fund is money that has already been set aside in the previous budget for these projects.
Except for $750,000 for a playground, I'm stuck on that one.
Well,
So the bids came in higher than we anticipated. We just went out to bid for the project. The bids came in significantly higher. The impact fees collected for that area are double that amount. It's a destination park, so.
So that's the question is, are the fees coming from, they are from impact fees from that area?
Yeah.
How big is that park?
2.5 acres.
2.5 acres?
This was a contingency that the council put when we did it, is that the impact fees had to come from that area.
And that was done last year. What?
Do we have other parks in that area that need to be completed? Thanks.
There will be some connection pieces to Midas Creek as we complete that trail, but we already have impact money set aside for that.
It's just 150% increase is just insane to me. I don't understand.
As kind of our concern, we reviewed the increase in budget on this one part, but it's crazy what the costs are doing, and actually are doing soft, the rise material for Snow Park. We have a huge maintenance problem with the park, and when it gets wore down or not to the right level, it becomes unsafe, and you have to do more and more inspections on it. So it actually gives more longevity to the park itself and the playground equipment. It's actually a pretty unique design. This will probably be a draw like this setup of the playground park is right in this little area right here.
Personally, I'd like to see the difference in the designs, and the difference in, I mean, I just can't in good conscience sign off on $750,000 for a playground without seeing the difference.
Compared to the playground we have out in Crane Park, what's the size comparable?
The one at this park is smaller.
Is smaller?
Yeah, it does have the Port of Place playground cover. Sorry, loss of words right now. The playground area is unique to the area. We went with the theming of arches. This park will have some unique features in a slackline course and a hammock area. There's also a big green grassy open space that provides for 10U soccer. So parking is another significant.
So it'll have some programmable space added as well then?
Yes.
So what are our options if we don't use that much money there?
So we cut the solid surfacing like we have here, so it's no longer ADA accessible. We
Well,
cut,
I mean, money-wise, let's say
soft surface is $250,000.
we say, okay, it's $1 million, where's the other $250 go?
You would have to cut.
No, he's saying if,
You would take out slack
What
lines,
else can the
downsize playground.
money be used for? I know we'd have to cut things out, and there's some of those things maybe we should cut out, but where would
we
my
use
point
it
is for those that
ultimately?
are watching and asking, I mean, we're stewards of the public purse here. We went from 500, increased it by 750. That's astronomical.
Well,
I mean,
so-
that's bigger than anything I've seen in the 2.5 years.
But let's
I've
ask
been
one
here.
fundamental question. When you say the prices increased, did you submit a design, the exact design that you're looking at now? So is the increase one of material, or is the increase one because you've expanded and added features?
The increase is because we were going on assumptions, based on assumptions. And when we went out to bid, those are the bids that came back. The low bid was
So we
just
didn't
under
truly have a
1.2.
bid the
Right.
first time around.
No.
Right.
Just
It's
something
usually
like-
on those parks, to try to get something in line for a budget. Usually we know typically what it costs per acre to do a park, and that was the number given. We finally started getting the detail of the design, and started flushing out increased costs, and that's why we had to come back to.
Maybe this helps. The playground itself is $500,000, just the playground and the softball. The,
And the softball
And then-
rubberized material will actually double the cost of the playground equipment.
Yeah.
If you look at $30,000 for playground equipment, it's gonna cost you $60,000 for the softball material, which is, we think is pretty critical in that liability issue.
so we added parking to this because it is such a unique park feature to that, so we added
Which was
the
another
play.
big cost.
So going to your question, if we were to just look at a standard grass thing, it's about 250,000 an acre, so we could, for $500,000, make just a really nice grassy area. But then the decision came back from that area, we haven't collected all the fees yet, but just in the park impact fees, we've collected over $2 million just from the neighborhood. So that neighborhood is an exporter of park impact fees to the rest of the city, even with this park. And so we're looking at,
When do we need to make this adjustment?
so if you make it tonight, then we will award the bid tomorrow and they'll start constructing and get that done. If you don't make this adjustment, then we don't award the bid, we wait till, if you come back and say, your budget's this, then we would just start pulling out various things. The saw and sprinklers is a minimum we'd keep, but you'd pull out the parking, we, put in the different kinds of material, the 250,000 could be replaced by the bark, and we can really bring down the playground area and take out the slack lines and other things to get it to a more traditional cost to get it in budget. So we'll get it to whatever
Where
budget.
exactly is this one located?
It's in the Anthem neighborhood.
Okay.
It's on Balance Rock and Tower Arch.
And the next closest park of the similar size and
Here.
amenities will be here. So
Tuscany, Umbria
That might be a little
would be
closer.
closer.
But two key points is they're exporting more
Than they're
fee
getting.
than they have received in service for parks. And then secondly, this is really the only park that would be considered in their area.
In that, and so you look at Umbria and that, they'd have to cross Herriman Parkway or go across a major road to go to another
What
park.
we're really sensitive about is this where my buy-in was, you can talk about the playground, playgrounds do get used. But more importantly, when Wendy and who she teamed up with is talking about, okay, we got a little bit of grass here we can actually program. Anybody knows what's going on in our community, programmable grass, that we can actually do a sport or activity on and program it for an event or anything like that and have some parking is super critical in our city right now. And so to add the parking lot and have a programmable grass is good. If we just do grass and don't do the parking lot, people will still program it, people will still use it without even asking permission, but they're gonna park in the street, and that's where you get that follow the residents around.
Is what I would
They
like
can
to
park
see
in the
is
street.
So that's where I came to
yeah,
board
the
is,
comparison.
any grass we can get them to program and schedule work.
Because I'll be the first to say in that my side of town, we have no parks, there's nothing, so I'm all for better, more and better over there, but I need
Yeah.
to see the difference to
And
justify.
also, big vision a little bit, when we think about programmable park, notice the term I keep using. But Bluffdale built their park down there around a day ago. The county built that park down there. It's not really programmable for sports. And it's a huge problem on this in the valley right now. And then when you think about that, where can we actually have a flatter piece of ground? We can do some parks like this that make them programmable. We get up in the mountain, it's gonna be very costly on an excavation. So we are looking at the opportunity we have to capture any programmable grass we can put in place that's flatter, and bring that cost down. So we are gonna put more parks, maybe we can on the north side of the city because we're losing the opportunity more on the
So my 2
southeast
cents.
side.
There, but it's not
We need
like-
more detail, you want more
Yeah.
detail.
That's.
I mean, to be able to justify to people, I mean, Sherry's point a few meetings ago, we're beating up the Arts Council on $10,000 and we're just gonna rubber stamp.
How would you like us to
750.
proceed, because next council meeting is gonna be the 22nd, I believe, and to get a nod to release for the contract to start, it'll be after that meeting, if we wait till then. Or you want us to push something
I'm
out,
fine
so
if you
you
wanna
all,
just go back around with everybody, give us the information. And ask them
Do you wanna see
how
the
we need
plans, is kinda what you wanna see?
I think that's where
Yeah.
I'm personally.
We can email you the plans.
I'd like to. It sounds like it's the right choice to do the larger area with the playground, having the programmable space as well as the playground for the other siblings that are there and for use throughout the year is, I think, important. I'd like to have a little bit more detail before we more than double what we budgeted for this particular part.
so this is what I will do, I'll work with Wendy, we'll get that circle around to all of you. If you'll pass a contingent on, I get nods for you to move forward on this project, we will not move forward until you are satisfied. And we can always pare it down, that's an easy thing to do. But to do it right the first time is always the right thing to do. But I get that. A lot of cities don't go back and fix parks after they've designed them the first time, they just try to maintain them as best they can. So I think I understand the direction. We will not move forward until we feel that you're all comfortable with it, okay?
Sounds good.
All right. Anything else? No. Okay. Item 3.3, Herriman Crossroads Development Agreement Discussion. Michael.
Thank you. We're still a work in progress, but we're anxious to see if you have any thoughts in response to some of the revisions that were included in the report. Alan's going to bring up that list of kind of high-level comments that I provided to the council in our last work session in June on this topic. But before, or while he's bringing that up, probably one of the key issues that Ken, Gary, and myself have been talking about, the original development agreement that was proposed did not include an architectural review committee. Essentially, it was going to use the planning commission as a review committee. We talked about that with the council, and the council had requested an interest that we add that component to the development agreement. The developers did provide that. That was one of the attachments in your packet. But what I've noticed, and this has not been uncommon in some of the other development agreements that we've executed as a city in the past, is that the review committee essentially consisted of the developer. And as I've reviewed other development agreements and as I've been seeing how we've been executing our own agreements that we've done in the past, I would like to see if we couldn't have a review committee that was more independent, that had some level of there's not a conflict of interest, so to speak. In fact, I reviewed some other development agreements outside of our city and found that that's not an uncommon element to ask for as a city. That was something that the property owners were uncomfortable with, and I could understand their point of view. They're saying, this is our property, why would we want to essentially put such kind of control in the hands of somebody else who doesn't have a financial stake in this project? And then my response was, well, that's why we need to work hard to get the development standards right in the agreement so that everybody understands what we're trying to hold everyone, including the developer and the city too, as far as developing out this property. I think once we had that conversation, their position was that they would be more comfortable not having an architectural review committee associated with this development agreement. So that's a big sticking point right now as far as our negotiations. So going through this list, the developers did present to you a series of slides. They were trying to address this question of what is the economic development to this benefit to the city. And essentially their key argument is, under this development agreement, the city will obtain more commercial development, potentially under what the base zone currently allows. And essentially more commercial development, a different tax structure, that was the benefit that they were arguing. I didn't know if that was sufficient to resolve our questions or concerns in that issue. That's why I labeled it as kind of a part response. Maybe that simple statement from the property owners is enough to address that issue for the council. We identified that we no longer have this term planned unit development in the code, and in fact, this is not a planned unit development. They're not asking for any exceptions to our standard zoning. So they have removed that label from the development agreement and replaced it with a more generic term. I already talked about the Architecture Review Committee. They did remove the mapped areas that were not included in the MDA. That was an easy fix. They also worked with the county to resolve an area discrepancy. It looked like a clerical error that the county had simply put in the wrong number in one of the fields in their data records. And so they worked with the county and get that corrected.
Which one was correct?
The larger, the 125. And that was what they were claiming from the beginning. Our data just wasn't showing that because we were based on the county. Ratio of amenities versus population. There's a letter that was included in your packet from it was kind of a real estate advisory or development advisory service, and they're saying that they looked at this and they felt like it did meet kind of the level of improvements or amenities for a quality project. What I was hoping is that we would actually develop more ratios. There are a few numbers within the project where it's saying we're going to provide this many benches or this number of workout stations. It doesn't really specify maybe as much detail as I think we were looking for as far as the level of comfort administrating the development agreement on the staff level. And that's where that ensure that we have measurable standards throughout the development agreement. There's some standards there, but others are still undefined or just, there's not a number, a ratio that we can easily work with as far as reviewing a development proposal. They did label photographs, but I think we need to bring a little more specificity. They basically were saying that this type of image conveys these couple of elements. And they did add this statement of saying, make sure that the product is better or equal to the proposal or the images that are in the development agreement. I just think that it would be better to have a little more specificity as far as what the images really are conveying. The improved clarity of the legal agreements, that's something that we will work on with John, so that's pending, that's our part. We'll do that. John did not want to look at this and review it until essentially staff and the property owner came to an agreement as far as what the draft really should contain. And the same is true for that city attorney review. He'll do that once we've completed our work. So that's really where we're at, I think. We're really kind of stuck on this issue of the Architectural Review Committee. I had a brief discussion with Gordon today about kind of how we've done these in the past, whether or not the city has really kind of rolled up their sleeves and actually wrote some of the development agreements. I've been told that that's not been the case, that the developer has been the one who's done the work. We're willing. I don't know if that's something the council wants us to be spending our time on. It feels like that's kind of where we're at, is they've tried to do what they can bring to the table. They're doing this kind of on their own. They're the ones who are scribing out the development agreement, so to speak. And I feel like, personally, if I were to be held responsible for administrating this agreement, I feel like it's just not quite there yet. I think there's still a lot of unanswered questions. I'm looking at this agreement thinking, how would I tell a developer, no, this was the intent, this was what's required by this agreement, not this? And I feel like it's still just very loose.
Well, I would totally agree with you, Mike. Yeah, because that's, I think it's how I feel. I know it's how a lot of my neighbors feel with a lot of these developments that we've watched come in over the last several years. It never looks like the picture. It never turns out the way that they presented it to us, no matter what the intentions were when it comes down to building it 2 years later, 5 years later, whatever it is. it never turns out that way. So my personal preference in reading through all this and listening to you explain is I like the independent review board. I can see the hesitation from somebody to want to do that. I'm glad you addressed that. And my first question was, how common is that? So it sounds like that's fairly common practice. In lieu of that, I mean, if that's something that absolutely they don't want to do, then I would say we need to be as firm on the details as possible.
Yeah, and I agree. I think the images that they're showing are good, but how do I make sure that that's actually what we get or something comparable to it?
And it's fair that they've done all the work they can to this point. As you said, I think if we want more, then we need to spend the time to say this is what we want.
So, I would echo that. As long as the developer is feeling comfortable with that, I think we can miscommunicate over and over and over again, and then we can get to the point where you can write what you want, and then we can flip it the other way and they can edit accordingly. So I don't have any problem with that. I think getting it right is the most important thing. And if that requires our staff to spend a little bit of time articulating that by writing it out, I think all the better. My only other concern is I want to make sure we're dealing with this developer with the same standard by which we deal with other developers. I am not comfortable bringing in an independent review board for this developer if we've not done it with others. Then I think we're holding a higher standard, and unfairly so. Now, that being said, I'm supportive of an independent review board in general, but not one that comes in on a specific developer and again puts them in a different place than any other developer. Again, we're always looking for equity and fair standards, and I don't want to make a higher hurdle for this developer than we've had for other developers.
And maybe the answer is we've really got to tighten up the design standards then. My recommendation is, I don't know how we ever make that switch then. Because right now what we're getting is we're getting
well, but this one has been going for a long time.
Okay.
This is not the one to do it on.
Okay.
We can start moving forward on that. Anything that's in the works, great. Let's notify them, or that's coming. So as of this date, but this one's been going for how long? This is not the time to bring in a new standard on this one in particular. So
I would agree with that. I'd like to see it on this one in particular,
but it's unfair.
But it is unfair. But I would like to see it going forward if we can have a general standard. Yes, we do a review board.
And personally, I'd like to see a review board starting with this one because this is the one before me right now, and this is, if it was somebody else's project, that would be the one I'd want to see it on because I want to see it. However, I also think that there is a level of equity in changing the finish line when you're
changing the rules halfway through.
When you're 5 yards out from the goal line, it's changing the rules is not always fair. So I can understand that, and it sounds like the developer's been working in good faith with the city. Is that correct?
Sure. Yes.
And so, if that's your opinion, I would say that it's a sign of good faith on ours as well to spend some time and effort to help with the development agreement and to help with maybe some of the writing and spending some staff time on it as a show that we are also trying to work in that good faith.
But I'd also say compared to other development agreements that I have spent poured hours and hours and hours and months of work into, those standards, those details are nowhere near what we have for other development agreements. So we need to hold them to that same standard as well.
Yeah, no, exactly. The same standard, I agree with wanting more detail. Certainly I want to clarify what the look and feel is going to be, but we're not always going to have professional quote-unquote developers that have loads and loads of money to bring in experts. And so let's have processes in place where the end project is good, but doesn't alienate or eliminate the opportunity for a developer that just doesn't have as deep of pockets as another and is still trying to work with the city for a good project. So there's got to be a balance there.
Give you what you need.
Okay. Sure.
I just say ditto.
She wants to go home.
Okay.
Okay.
We'll keep working.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. I guess you're going to stand up here because we're going to move on to item 3.4, discussion of a text change to the Land Development Code on behalf of Herriman City, amending Chapter 16, table and uses.
Just very briefly, this is no. This is essentially the first of two parts in reviewing our land use tables. As hard as our consultant tried, Neil Lindberg, last year to rewrite and clean up our zoning ordinance or our land use regulations. There were a number of inconsistencies, and so that's what this largely is cleaning up, making sure the land use table does match with the other references within the code. Plus, there were a few other changes that the commission had recommended as far as removing, for example, I think heavy industry. The commission felt like that was a use that they never thought would be appropriate in places within the city. So all of these underlined and strike-throughs, of course, are subject to the council's review and pleasure as the legislative body. The next step in this process is to relook at a few land uses that are conditional, that are fairly routine in their process with the planning commission. For example, a church. We've done a lot of church reviews, and we know basically what those standards are. When we get to yes on a conditional use for a church, what does that look like? Well, let's take those standards and just codify them, make them a permitted use, but include those standards right in the zoning code. So they would no longer, in theory, go to the planning commission for a conditional use review. So there's a few land uses like that that require some additional standards to be inserted into the code before we can make that move. But these amendments, staff supports, and the commission is recommending for your review, and as you know, we'll have a subsequent business meeting on this at a later date.
So with for example, the churches, obviously there's a particular religious organization where we do a lot of those for. Or would we be confident that the design standards would meet the needs of all religious organizations and not just the majority organization here in the valley?
That's a good question. I think most of the standards or the conditions that we usually attach to an approval have to do more with access, engineering,
which is what
landscaping, some materiality. There's often been a question on, percent of masonry or what the masonry material looks like. If we're obviously in making that amendment to the land use regulation, you would see as a council, you would see what those standards are. And either you could say, I'm uncomfortable with that, or let's put in greater specificity into the code. But I think we can get there.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. All right, thank you. Anything else for us? Okay. All right, item 3.5, Gorilla Car Wash Transportation Impact Fee Reduction Request. Blake.
We're gonna delay that one until next meeting.
It's gonna be delayed.
We needed to have some adjustments to the study. It needs to be equated to equivalent residential connections and.
Already.
Thank you. Yep. All right, we will continue that to the next meeting.
Thank you.
Item 3.6, discussion relating to the small wireless facility deployment ordinance. John, this one's gonna be fun.
Oh yeah, this is fun. So the legislature passed SB 189 that basically mandates small cell facilities on city-owned facilities. And this is an attempt to deal with that, and it needs to be done by like September 8th, so we'll probably be on for our next meeting for approval. It's still a work in process because it was difficult to draft.
Lobbying efforts happened during the session. No, just certainly not zero from the city.
From the other side.
stand. I'm not saying from the other stand.
From the other, it was, here it is. And we were able to keep.
I'll tell you what I saw from the league, from those meetings, was AT&T was up there and said, here's what we want you to do, and they said, okay.
Have you seen these?
Yes, they're very ugly.
They are an eyesore, and they are frequent, and it's
Every 60 feet.
60 feet.
It's crazy.
Is there any way we can require that the majority of the equipment be placed below ground level?
It's too expensive.
Well, no.
Mine wouldn't work.
There's.
I'm not talking about the antenna. The antenna obviously has to be up high, but the 3 3
Box.
cubic foot box that goes
A
next to it.
refrigerator?
The refrigerator that goes next to it. Can we require that be?
Nope, I don't think so.
So what, if I recall correctly, there was a handful of things that we could do, is that?
Yeah, so we're fortunate here, is if there's already utility lines above ground, there's not much you can do. Because their argument is, we just wanna be like everybody else.
Well, gosh darn it, you can be like everyone else here.
And all our utility lines are underground. So, majority of them. Well, hopefully to resident, Old Town.
Well, we're
Old
gonna
Town.
So you gotta redo 6,000 west, man.
It's time.
So, that's the standard we put on them, is if current stuff is underground, you need to go underground, but they still get to put their.
The legislation
Now,
notes that.
there was, if I remember, there was something in discussion in that case that they could come and put their own poles in
Yeah, if
if
we
they wanted.
don't allow them to co-locate, they are allowed to put up basically whatever they want. And that would be a wood pole every 60 feet.
But that's if we don't allow, if we don't allow them to co-locate,
Well,
or they just can.
They can co-locate, which means they get to go on city-owned utility poles. The only things we own are streetlights and our semaphores.
And there's no cost to them to do this.
Well, yeah, there's a cost
There's
to
a
it.
cost.
Minimum.
Yes,
But
it's
it's-
minimum, it's like $250 fee per application
For
for
Nothing-
the
and nothing
refrigerator
ongoing.
for each life, for each refrigerator.
like a one-time
There's a
fee.
one-time fee.
There's an ongoing fee and it's.
I object. I just
It
object to
is.
this whole thing.
The site license fee shall, not be more than the greater of 3.5% of the gross revenues related to the provider's use of the right-of-way, or $250 annually.
I got used for that money.
Of course you do, Gordon.
You buy a couple of pens, are you?
Yeah.
So, I guess the question to me still remains, is they could co-locate on a power pole, could they,
Well, they have to have the deal with Rocky Mountain, and I don't think there's really too many Rocky Mountain power poles that they can really go on around here.
Right.
Maybe there's a few,
so I guess the question is, could they go and just put their own poles in?
well, there's a limitation, so, let me just find this for you. There's certain areas that can't go.
The challenge is it so vastly improves service that it's a hard,
Pretty hard.
it's a hard sell when all of a sudden your service is so improved, and if you just avert your eyes, and probably you're texting while you're driving anyway, so you don't even see it. You don't even see the poles, so it's
Using my
really
phone
not
while
gonna
I'm
be a
driving
problem.
anyhow. I don't understand.
I'm not, but other people.
You won't ever have it. This is one of those, this is happening bills.
Yeah, whether you like it or not.
You can try to tweak some things. And the tweak we got was that they have to conform to, we can have some
Lamps.
use over look.
And we're working with Mike to come up with some more specific design standards.
Like black powder coated poles.
Yeah.
John, can we add some language that would take care of, we have some areas we plan on burying the cable in the short future. Because right now it's above ground, if they would come in, as it's written now, they could be able to go on existing wood poles. But our plan is to bury certain lines, if it's in our plan, look at one kind of somewhere. Can we have the language, if it's part of our future plan, to bury the line, then they have to go underground.
Our plans are to bury every wooden pole, by the way, so I'm just making that really clear.
We need to have it.
But when they come for their application,
Needs to be in
if you have a
writing
wooden
in
pole above
plans.
ground, they have to go above ground.
But, well, private language, just like with Rocky Mountain Power, if we want to bury the lines at our cost, the difference between the
Don't
wood
let-
poles. So at that time, when we go from a above ground facility, we're asking them to bury their line and come up with their small cell antennas that comply with the design standards for that, and all like the language that they pay for the cost.
So do we have any idea what the actual likelihood of a refrigerator every light pole is gonna be?
When they come, they'll come.
But I see this more as I mean, to me, and this is for places like apartment complexes where there's a lot of use in a very condensed area around commercial areas is where I would see the vast majority of it. Now, that doesn't mean that technologies don't change and they won't want this in the future. Do we have any, and maybe the answer is we have no idea, but you know, I think people residents are a lot more comfortable with this kind of stuff in a highly trafficked commercial area than they are over in every 60 feet down their nice, pretty white picket.
Yeah, so they're not allowed in residential areas where the right of way is less than 60 feet.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So they have to be out on the big roads.
Traffic corridors then.
So,
Hamilton Farms is
Rose
also
Crest
50
Road
feet.
would be an example where they could be.
Probably
We have
it's over
60,
60
maybe
feet.
70.
I don't know, that's what I'm asking.
I don't know that.
Gordon,
There's two things, as John and I have been talking about this, I've also been reaching out to some other cities and finding out what they've been doing. There is a technology where you have essentially kind of a fatter pole, it's a freestanding pole, metal, so it's paintable and it will contain all of the equipment except for one thing, and that is the meter. Rocky Mountain Power won't allow essentially a per pole rate. They want every single installation to have its own separate meter. So that's the one thing that I don't think we'll be able to get away from. The other thing that I have had some success with is that oftentimes these companies, they will specify a cabinet that is oversized, just because that's what is readily available within the marketplace. And I don't know, I haven't looked at this particular regulation closely enough to know, but I've been successful at saying you can't have a cabinet larger than what is necessary for the equipment at that site. And we've been able, in other cities I've worked for, been able to get cabinets down smaller. Other communities have also passed a design district, which will allow you to have additional design standards. I think we could get away with doing that here in the town center. I don't know if we can do that in other places in the city, but I think definitely the town center is a component I think we might want to add in the land use regulation portion as a kind of a partner with what John's been working on.
Does this allow them to go in on private roads without approval from the city?
If they're on our
Because
right of way, right?
We have lots of HOAs that have private roads that we have light poles.
But it's right away.
This only deals
It has
with
to be
city
on
right of way.
City right of way.
So if it's not a city right of way, if it's a private right of way, they can't just go
There
in.
is public utility easements in all those.
Yeah,
That's why I'm asking, like that's.
They may not be
Right,
subject
but
to
those
this
are-
ordinance, but it's be subject to what the state, so if the state says they can go on to private right of way, they can. We're not addressing that here
In
at
public
this
utility
time.
easement, it is utility.
The 60 foot.
Yeah, and most of our
Is it
private
60
roads are
wide?
less than city standards, so.
Some roads are 60, some are 60.
But is the residential limitation, does it state it by residential, or does it state it by the size of the road, the width of the road?
Residential area with.
Can you give me an example, Blake, of a 60-foot right-of-way road?
But can we in ours
Anything in
specify,
Hamilton
because
Farms.
Gordon was making the point that we have many residential roads that are in fact 60, which would make them applicable to this. Can we?
State statute.
Oh, so there's, again, just,
So
why do we even discuss these things when we can't do anything? It's just
there's very
aggravating.
few subdivisions we have that don't have at least one or some 60-foot roads. There are some that are entirely 60, but not many. Right now, most of our subdivisions are 53 with a 60-foot collector through them.
Should we change our ordinance to have 59-foot right-of-ways?
Yes.
I'm dead serious. Like, would it make sense for us to change our standard road width to 59 feet?
We have had some that's 58, so.
Yes, I think.
just recently.
A fixed feature, but you got a lot of existing roads.
I think to protect
Well,
the
but-
residential
But we
field.
also have a lot of growth coming, and so to protect what's coming forward, maybe that's something we need to consider, is changing the 59.5 feet.
Although again, if the intent of the legislators was that these eventually be, all will be seen as is not, as
Not
going
willing to
against
play.
the spirit of the law and the intent of the law. So if their intent is to have these wherever they want them to be, well then we might as well just move on to the next agenda item
Cause
Make
if
it-
they
well,
can
I
make
think
a
we
quick
do-
little tweak and just strike out that 60.
and just get.
I think we
just
do
be very
everything we
simple for that.
can, use all the tools we can, Michael mentioned, et cetera, do everything we can that way, but.
And this is, to me, it's not that, I think technologies like these are gonna come, and we're never going to be able to truly stop them, because the demand from our residents is eventually going to meet where they want
Service.
certain level of service. We hear all the time from residents that are upset that or at least anecdotally, that they're upset that we only have an option between this provider and this provider. Why can't we have this third provider? Why, and
Because it's capitalism, they have to want to be here.
So we can work on design standards.
So I think we need to work on it. But at the same time, I don't want to get us in a situation where we have a refrigerator on every single light pole. We're gonna have, so.
Down your main drag, you may have a refrigerator around every
The
single.
one comment I'd give you,
Can I
I
just lay
think
it down?
this
on the
ordinance should be passed like it should be. However, we're having difficulty anticipating all the things that are gonna shock us. So I anticipate this ordinance, when you pass it, will not be correct, and we're gonna have to amend it. So
Driving
it'd be
line of sight.
great if we waited till it was perfect,
Does it
we would
address
never
it?
pass an ordinance. So I'm gonna suggest, do the very best, vet it out the best we can, and then amend it when we see what really happens.
Yeah. Does this piece address line of sight for driving? Because if we start putting refrigerators on every light pole,
They cannot be in the,
Clear view.
line.
I think we have other ordinances to protect on that, but let's keep vetting it, and we'll bring you an ordinance to pass. I would love it to be perfect. We'll insist that it is, but
I
we'll
think
probably.
there's two things that give us an
You'll
advantage to go with that plan. One is that we have almost the majority underground, right? So they're gonna go to the more densely populated areas first and put them where it's easy to put them up first, and we'll see what happens. We'll see what other cities do, and we'll be able to go through that process that Gordon just described. So
Now, I have not received any request to put these small cells in Herriman. I don't know if you've heard from anybody, Michael.
Yeah, not here, but they are talking with other cities.
They are talking with other cities,
Yeah.
and they're raring to go with other cities, but hopefully they'll stay away from Herriman for a while.
It's good to see a little bit of bloodletting elsewhere, and then we'll watch what the damage is, and then we'll make some adjustments.
So any other questions or concerns from the council? Any other direction staff needs from us?
Nope.
Okay.
I'll do some more tinking and I'll be back on.
Yay.
on the conflict.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it. All right, item 3.7, city manager updates. Brett.
I have quite a list, Mayor and Council. One, I'd like to recognize Supatune here from 103. They're also our wildlands experts in the area.
Should you guys be out there?
Could you stand up and introduce your team with us?
Absolutely. So Chief Pilgrim sends his regards. He's in California.
How dare you fight fires?
Yeah, really. So yeah, correct. We're from Station 103. This is Robbie Anderson, Jesse Gillum, and Jesse Carpenter. And I'm John Lau. I'm the captain there today. So Captain Lathan's normally there, but he is out on that fire. You can see the huge plume out south. He's on that one. So they bring me into Herriman when he's gone.
I appreciate you coming over and
Yeah, absolutely.
being part of our meeting and letting know the council we're around as our fire department. Also want to take a moment and remind the council and mayor that Battalion Chief Day passed away last week, and his funeral services was never high yesterday, and that's why you see their badges blacked out. They're not aware of that. Unified Police Department helped out with some of the security and escort with that, as well as Herriman HPD did that as well. He passed away in his own yard less than a week ago, and we're sorry to see him go. He had a lot of year experience. I think he had 35 or 37 years, if I remember right. Well, shoot off the cuff. Like I said, he was Battalion 12. He was in our battalion, so wanted to let his family know we appreciate all he did for our area and his years of service, and our hearts go out to him. So I just wanted the council, the Green Day is next Tuesday. Office will be closing early. Those who can attend for our picnic, and your tickets are with you for you and your family. And I had a question asked to me, if you don't attend, what happens? They're not prepaid for it, they're paid for as they get used or scanned in. So
Cole, you're going.
So we only pay for what gets used. Another item, Salt Lake Community College is starting classes, and Councilman Owens is very familiar with this, in our old community center. They'll be holding classes all fall and they've got a wide list of classes they're holding, and they're pretty impressive, the list they're holding classes in Herriman. And this is trying to show the interest there is in having a college campus here. So that is, when's that start, Gordon? About 2 weeks. And then tomorrow, Salt Lake Community College and the building authority is meeting at Salt Lake Real. We sent you an email like last week, reminding you on that. The mayor will be attending, I think that came actually out from me, if you look for that. So that time is it 10 o'clock or 10:30, Gordon? So it's gonna be at Real Academy. And Salt Lake Community College will be there, and the building board authority will be there. Then the 24th of August, they're meeting with the Board of Regents. And this is them prepping the legislative session of getting the building funded to come out of the ground. And Nicole knows this very well. In 2011, we partnered with a developer, and the city actually donated property to Salt Lake Community College, 30 acres, and they purchased 60 acres. There's a 90-acre campus going on there by Real. We hope we get funding this week, come out of the ground with that. So if you can attend that, it'd be great. President will be there, and anything we can do to help Board Region and the building authority to understand this is needing this end of the valley. And we've been waiting for quite a while for it to happen. We've made our commitment pretty on. We built infrastructure. I'm sorry to say it, kind of being blunt, but it's the state's turn to help what we committed to many years ago.
When was that commitment originally made? How many years?
You said 2011?
What's that? 2011.
2011.
Okay, item was brought up by Councilman Orrin about escort military welcome home procession. And we've done a little bit of research on that. The cities actually not passed a resolutional ordinance to such, but I've asked Wendy to speak on this a little bit because we dug up information from Shelley. She worked on it a little bit, and then Wendy, because some of the recommendations that will affect your staff to pull us off, and she's very supportive of doing this. I've heard from council and the mayor that you're supportive of this. So I want to talk about some of the parameters we do, and then this decision, I need some direction where you want to pass it by resolution, or just do it by administrative order, or what? Would you talk from?
So Shelley did some preliminary information searching and gathering from some other municipalities that have a similar program. They form a volunteer committee that really does the brunt of the work. So we would form another citizen committee. They take care of placing flags, tying yellow ribbons, those sorts of things. They work with the camp or the local military service arms to see when they're coming home, what the family's plans are, if this is something that they're even interested in doing. Some of them meet at a certain location in City Hall, for example, because flights can be delayed, things can get in the way. So timing is really interesting for these types of things. And so some meet at City Hall and then escort them to their homes. It's just a wide variety of things that they do. I've reached out to some of my peers that work across the country. None of them do anything similar to this, but they were very interested in what we put together. So there'll be more information coming as we collect information and decide which route you want to go.
So what we do is try to get the word out. If you want to keep on supporting this idea and concept, is we would get the word out to where we form a committee, and usually it's the families or friends that are close to the military people that serve, and they become on this committee and they help us get the yellow ribbons out and do the flags, those things. I really like what cities have done when they start at the City Hall, because it's a way to start things and not try to come from the airport because that gets too fragmented, or try to start our city boundary. Sure, City Hall do the thing we can do with social media about welcome home, all those things, and get it on Facebook and our signboards, and then have some type of a procession, whether it be Unified Fire or HPD, escort them to their home. And if the mayor can't attend, we would always welcome mayor and council, but if you can't attend, at least we want some of you. I think it's a good approach. So if you like those concepts, we'll solicit social media to start soliciting those people that might engage those families?
Well, I think we have to redo the ordinance first, or committees
And
again.
you wanna do the resolution, or administrative
Maybe, I'm
order?
sorry, you're saying we might have to redo the ordinance to do it.
If we're adding another citizen committee, we have to look at that ordinance again.
So it sounds like if we have to do a
Like
ordinance
American
anyways.
Fork and Eagle Mountain do not have a resolution or ordinance. They just do roads.
It would just be
I
an addition.
personally wanna have an ordinance for this.
I think a resolution is a little bit more light, but it does show your support for it. I think that's always good for the public eye.
I think if we announce it, we do it.
Okay.
We're supporting.
We're supporting.
The city's
Yeah,
doing it.
I know you're supportive, but I'm just trying to, so no ordinance, no resolution, we'll do it by administrative order, but you're.
I think it's great to get, our team is
In
great to
some
get
ways, I feel like
information out.
doing it under ordinance puts the focus on us and not on where it should be, which is on the service member.
Okay, I think we got some direction there, and now Wendy and her department got something else
You're getting
with communications. John's got an update on the Danzy MDA.
He just,
Where'd he go?
just left.
I'll,
Heck with him.
It's required, we're starting over.
we have the signature, however, we're waiting on the traffic study and the boundary of the property.
But they have signed.
Both those
Great
questions,
report
yes
to you.
and yes, so I wasn't ignoring you.
But it is now a signed
We
agreement.
called and talked to them, but we can't record it without those two documents in it. So, John, if he was here, he would say, I talked to him today and they said they would have it to us in about a week.
That's what we heard a month ago.
Yeah, and this is 6 months.
And we said, we'll give you 2
Right.
weeks.
There's no reason you can't conduct a traffic study and have a updated legal description on your property in less than 6 months.
Like we said, that was
Doesn't
2
make
months ago,
sense
we
to
said
me.
that.
Right.
That's what you get for talking in place of John.
Okay. John did not do his job, is what I wanted to say here.
Your own fault, Gordon.
That's why.
That's why you left.
Well, okay, so I just wanted, I'm giving you a heads up, so we are talking to him. To be honest with you, we talked to him quite a bit before this meeting because we wanted to be here in this meeting, say it was recorded. So there was a lot of dialogue previous to this meeting over the last 2 weeks. And I know I was in most of the meetings or the phone conversations that John was in, so I know I'm just reporting, man. Let's get after John.
What's your gut feeling that we're going to get something in a week?
I think we'll get it within 2 weeks. So
That's nice.
on the 22nd, I'll come back and John will say we have it as recorded. I believe in my heart of hearts that we're that close at this point.
That's what I thought we were at.
That's where we were,
Let's see what his heart of hearts.
looking back, it was 2 months ago, we said 2 weeks.
But John
And at
reported
that
that, I
time,
didn't know.
and at that time, there was no legitimate reason to be holding this up. There's no reason that these things could have been done between now and then. I'm saying, get it done or else. We'll pull it.
Yeah, John's given them the concern we have, so,
One of you needs to be bad cop.
yeah. We will, again, relate to them. They came over, sent us that signature, and we're all excited thinking the rest was following. And it didn't follow.
No,
It was-
it's just, you only get to use that excuse so
The
long.
traffic study was not extensive, it was just to take in a few
Add
things, it
something.
was to add the school, basically tweak it a little bit, and that's it. There was nothing, it was basically the report with the addition of the charter school and the changes that made. And then the boundary could have just been the county property, Sid Wills, and we would have accepted any variations as a staff, you know. And so they're not doing an actual survey anymore. So we could actually pull all those properties and create that, and maybe that, and I talked to John today, we may end up just doing that for that piece. But,
Which is ridiculous.
Yeah, no, it needs to be
It's-
done.
Yeah.
so we may end up
I'm
just
done
doing, we can record because we have the signature page, and we could go to the engineer and pay them to just do the last piece of it.
No,
I'm just telling you, we haven't done, those are extreme measures, but we may end up doing the legal piece of it.
So
But
we'll let
not
John know that he
paying.
should stick around because this year.
No, we would have staff to legal, and we can do that in-house. They had initially said they wanted to do a survey, a real detailed, and get it correct,
And you're
which
saying
takes
that's
a
not
month or so.
necessary.
But this is 4 months ago, and so we thought it would be completed. While that's preferred, it's not necessary.
It's just that, like you said, it takes about a month. That was 4 months ago. This whole thing has been 7 months.
I don't believe that started yet, so that's why I'm saying we're probably gonna go back to the less preferred but adequate. Cause there's like 5 parcels and we just have them identify the parcel ID number with the acreage. And then there's variation.
campaign to have us revoke this is what they're gonna get.
Okay, so 2 weeks, sounds good.
The residents are all over this.
Can we put that in the minutes that
I actually
John
get,
said
I
that?
actually get correspondence pretty regularly asking why it's done, what's the status on this, so I just think it needs to.
I'm embarrassed for you, I don't know
So
what to
does
say.
council have any further comment or direction to staff on that particular
Thanks
item?
for taking
2
the
weeks.
heat.
2 weeks.
It's just an update anyway on CM, so we just, found this happened Monday, so.
We were gonna do more, but each day we kept hoping for things that didn't materialize.
Okay.
It's still Brad.
So finish this up, we have a couple more items and I have a comment to maybe move into reorder our agenda a little bit and I think you'll be supportive. But Utah Leaf City Town's annual conference is coming up September 12th through the 14th. I've heard from Nicole to get her registered. Mayor, council, are you want to attend so we get your registered?
August or September?
September 12th through 14th. It's Wednesday through Friday.
For the Sheridan, Salt Lake.
Salt Lake, yeah, sorry.
I know, yeah, it's always at Salt Lake in the fall and
St.
St. George in the spring. Which,
And they're generally pretty good stuff to get from those.
Yes, I'll be there.
So no, get you registered then.
Yes, that's.
Sherry,
I would like to, but there's no way.
okay, then I'll find out from Clint. Okay?
It'll be a party of Nicole.
So far 3, Jared's no, and Sherry's yes,
Showing up for the
Nicole's
June day,
yes,
there's nothing.
and the mayor's yes. She'll fall.
Hey, he called me out on that day.
Okay, the other item I have is just we are very proud of our financial department, and between them and the communications team partnered up again to do our PAFR. The PAFR is the popular annual financial reporting process, and we received award through mail, and we haven't got the plaque yet. We'll do a formal presentation in the general meeting when we'll get the plaque and that's what we're having. So, we'll let you know that this is a lot of effort that goes into this, not only the CAFR, but the PAFR, as well how we communicate our finances to the public and to be able to understand and be able to recall and be able to pull up certain items and have a good understanding. So Alan, you and Tammy and your teams that's involved in getting the PAFR, I didn't know they was getting it done, but they got it done. And Alan, this is our first for the PAFR in Herriman City. So congratulations to our financial team.
It's the first one with time.
If any of you understand or know a little bit about the financial world in government, this is the CAFR and the PAFR is the highest award you can get. And you have to re-earn it every year, so you know what that means, Alan, right?
And there really aren't that many
Tammy's gotta
cities.
step up.
There really aren't that many cities that get it, so it's
No.
not as if every city in the
It's
state
rare,
is getting
it's
it.
actually, the PAFR is very rare. The CAFR is hard to work for and get, we've been successful since Alan's come on board with that. But Alan has been very complimentary of Tammy and her team, Jonathan and Mitch. Jonathan's over there, he's a huge pat on the back, the work he did on the graphics and stuff, so the public can understand this. And this gets reviewed back in Chicago and stuff. It's not locally reviewed. So it's not like it's our standard, it's the national standard. I can't say enough, right? We'll do a presentation when that plaque comes in and have those who've been a part of that be in front of you. Okay?
I just want to say,
Congratulations.
Yes.
I'm not surprised. And I think that's awesome that I'm not surprised that our staff does such a great job. They continue to get awards in regards to the work they do. And congratulations, you guys do a great job.
Good job.
So another thing that's come up is, it's called ranked choice voting. It's been worked on, and Jacqueline actually went to a recording meeting today in Draper and got a whole couple of information on that. So she doesn't really want to, but we've asked her to talk on it, because she's probably right now the expert on it in this room.
So ranked choice voting, or a lot of people have called it the instant runoff voting. This was from House Bill 35. It actually provides a nonpartisan electoral reform that would give voters an opportunity to rank their choices of whoever is going to be elected to basically replace a primary election. How that actually works is when somebody gets their ballot, they can say my choice A is, let's use colors, purple. My choice, Nicole. Okay.
While we're bringing up a scenario, choice A. Choice B.
Choice A.
You're not gonna like being choice A in this, which I think is.
Oh, okay,
Just
helping out.
So, and then you can have as many candidates as you want, and the ranked choice can go 4, it could go 8, depending on how many candidates you have. When they go to actually tally those after the actual election, whoever receives the least amount of votes, basically all of those votes would take a look and say, well, who was their second choice and who was their third choice?
So if choice A had the least number of votes, they would redistribute them to choice
To whatever
B through
choices
F.
that they actually had voted for. This is so that you get the majority of votes going to a candidate rather than just, winning with the 35%. You are required to have to be over the 50%. So the majority speaks, so to say. So then they'll just distribute those votes saying, okay, the last choice, choice D, wasn't the favorite amongst them, so they'll take whatever their second choice, third choice, fourth choice, and so on, and distribute them to however they ranked their second choice was going to be. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that the person who has the most choice, the highest at the
most won votes.
The most won votes will actually win that election.
Because they're redistributed as
People
candidates
drop
drop out.
It helps adjust it for like split votes and things like that.
So we remember the challenge with the hanging chad, which was a poke. Do we have the system in place?
No.
So what kind of timeline would you need to actually make this work and have it be validated such that there would not be a question as to the end results?
So the pilot program starts January 1st of 2019 and it goes till, I believe it's January 1st, 2026. The Salt Lake County's equipment, they just updated it. It is not set up, designed to actually count these types of ballots. So you would actually have to go back to hand
hanging chad, I'm just throwing it out there.
Tabulating those using Excel spreadsheets. That method is actually
Don't
having
even
to
dare
do it.
there.
I did speak with Sherry Swenson about this. The county won't even offer to do this type of an election, so the city would take on that. So there would be a reduced cost of not having to have a primary election because it would eliminate that and then have the general election. However, resources would have to be dedicated to basically mail out all of the ballots, or if we decide we wanted to just do an election day and take a step back from doing absentee, vote by mail, we could do something like that, but you're either going to have to add more resources or actually purchase equipment that can actually tabulate this.
Any municipalities stated they are going to go to this method?
None that I've heard of.
I don't want to be the first, in all honesty.
I would agree with that statement because I think it needs to be vetted out. There are other states, Santa Fe, New Mexico did do this. Minnesota does do this. However, they don't push vote by mail elections either. So it makes it a little bit easier because if somebody messes up on their ballots, they basically take their spoiled ballot to the poll worker and just get a new ballot, which that's going to be a little bit more difficult if they're at home and they make a mistake.
Which they absolutely will.
It's a going through provisional ballots. I know that the county last year went through, it took them about 2 hours to go through 38 provisional ballots, because of issues that they had. So I'm thinking like that would be.
So by March, you know who your candidate was. That's what we.
There still is a canvass process, but it just would be a little bit more convoluted.
Yeah, that's exactly what we need in our election system, is a more convoluted process.
And then a recount threshold is quite different, so rather than the 0.25%, it would be calculated very differently, whether a recount could be, considered.
Philosophically, I like what they're trying to do, which is that the candidate you get in is actually, has earned the majority, so it is a voice of the people idea and philosophy, which I like, but it just, again, until we get our arms around the current election process, which clearly is not the case, given all of the trauma and crisis that happens every election, it feels like adding additional layers and human elements and all of that would just be a nightmare.
My additional concern would be that this is only for the primary election that it would eliminate, so you would have a primary election that you would do rank your candidates, but then the general election you're picking one. And that's just gonna cause mass confusion to voters and that is.
Different kinds of voting and.
Anytime you say redistribution, it doesn't sit well.
I would.
You're redistributing votes, you're redistributing.
And I mean, they do
money,
have the
I don't know.
option not to, if they only wanna vote for one, absolutely, they can just vote for one, but if they wanna say, well, I like so-and-so, but I also like so-and-so a little bit less, they have that option for their vote
But then in
to
terms of,
be not wasted.
well, in terms of confusion as a candidate, well then all of a sudden you've introduced a new strategy. So then you start to play in, yeah, then you're working for the first vote, but you're also working for the second vote.
And I think
So
that's kind of the pitch that some of them are giving, is that it focuses that because you're always looking at the second and third vote, it is intended to make the voting or the election system more civil because you're not going to tear down your opponent because you're hoping for their votes if they don't get enough. And so I, in principle, personally would love to see this in a few years after it's been vetted some, but now is not the time for us to be getting in the middle of this.
And speaking with the county, their equipment won't be even considered to be updated again until after 2021. And so there is some substantial time.
I just don't see it being.
I'd say we're good at doing things the first time, but this is not one that we want to do.
interesting.
Thank you.
Mayor, with that said, that's a suggestion, because I know y'all like hang around here all night. Can we reorder the agenda and go into a closed door for property?
Yes.
That way you just have a little brief.
I would be happy to entertain such motion.
So moved, what do you say?
Oh, you
You have to read the whole
for
thing.
what it is.
Here, just
To
read
make a
that.
motion, are you
There, she's on it.
So I
To
need,
temporary assistant city
directors,
council.
managers.
I have to get the motion
To
first.
convene in closed session for the purpose of discuss the purchase, exchange, or lease of real property provided by you for the annotated 52-4-205.
Second.
Okay, Jared? Sherry? Nicole?
Yes.
I vote yes. Thank you
Jared's
guys.
taking a quick break while we adjust, and we'll see you in just a second.
Thank you for coming.
Alan, can I?
Turned on the feed, what do you need now? 10 minutes.
Just-
Jared's coming back in.
You sent me. Good. So.